The name Buffalo Bill conjures up, for many, the romance of the American West, childhood memories of Western movies and dime novels, and a sense of cultural identity that frames both the legend and the reality of the American West as we know it today. For others, Buffalo Bill represents the tragedy of American conquest and the loss of bison, indigenous lands, and autonomy. But who exactly was this man, this legend of the West, and what was his role in American history?
I think with Buffalo Bill, when we ask what role did he play, we just instantly have to say, better make that plural. What roles did he play? Because he is just a great training ground for the mind, for anybody who is tempted to simplify the people of the past.
Buffalo Bill was not just a creature of fiction. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor. He was very much a part of the Indian Wars and all of the things that he later on portrayed in his Wild West show.
Buffalo Bill is an interesting character and a very complex story across time and space and lots of different concepts that are a little bit controversial and sometimes really cool and really fascinating. And all of those things come together in the Wild West story and Buffalo Bill's story.
The 1800s in North America were a complicated time of both expansion and settlement, of gain and loss, of fulfilling the dreams of some and crushing the hopes of others. Right in the middle of this turbulent time in American history was William F. Cody, later known as Buffalo Bill. Will Cody came of age in Kansas Territory during a period when pro- and anti-slavery factions split Kansas Territory. Even as far west as Kansas, the events leading up to the Civil War had tragic consequences for young Will Cody.
His father did not think slavery should be in Kansas, spoke out about it at a public meeting, at which point a pro-slavery man jumped up, sort of stepped onto the dais, if you will, where he was talking, and stabbed him several times.
Cody's father eventually died as a result of his wounds, but not before the pro-slavers made life difficult for the family.
The family itself would be raided by some of them. They would come in and take food. They stole Buffalo Bill's horse. It was pretty tough.
And so, at the age of 11, after having lost his father and only brother, Will Cody set out to support his mother and sisters and find his place in the world. By the age of 17, he had worked as a messenger for an early version of the Pony Express, carried messages for the Army, drove mule trains along the Oregon Trail, prospected for gold right here in Colorado, and worked as an Army scout.
He was hired as a scout because he had so much experience traveling throughout the Great Plains, but also because he did know the American Indians. The folks in the Army didn't really know much about working with the Indians, but he did. So that became very helpful.
Buffalo Bill earned his nickname as a hunter for the Kansas Pacific Railroad. Cody was hired to provide buffalo meat for the railroad workers as they constructed line through the prairie. He proved to be so skilled in hunting bison that he earned his nickname Buffalo Bill Cody.
I think there's been a little bit of a misunderstanding that Buffalo Bill is the one who is responsible for the decimation of the American bison, and that's really not true. At that period of time, there were 30 to 60 million bison on the landscape, and there was a huge population of bison across the American West. So the amount that Buffalo Bill was hunting in order to feed the workers was really a sustainable amount at that point.
All kinds of factors converge to reduce the population of bison. By putting bison in such prominent places in the Wild West show, he brought the bison into so many minds as real creatures, as creatures that they saw that were pretty magic in various ways and just kind of beyond comprehension. So it's hard to think that the more conventional forms of bison preservation would have gotten anywhere near as far without Cody saying, you'll want to care about these creatures.
Buffalo Bill had gained local notoriety in the West as a skilled scout and buffalo hunter. But a meeting with a famous author launched Buffalo Bill into the spotlight.
Dime novels were written about people like Kit Carson, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett. They were looking for interesting frontier characters. Ned Buntline was a dime novel writer, and when he met Buffalo Bill and wrote a story about him, that catapulted Buffalo Bill into some national fame. And that is what really gave the sort of jump start to his career as a man in show business.
Buffalo Bill's growing fame came on the heels of the Indian Wars of the 1850s to 1890s, when European Americans were reeling from Custer's defeat at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and the Cheyenne, Lakota, and Arapaho celebrated the rightful victory. It was also a time when the West of Cody's youth had changed forever.
We have this young man who realizes as he's watching the West disappear around him through development and railroads and other things, and he's realizing that where he grew up is no longer existing. And that's when he started developing his Wild West show.
He wanted to very much show the peoples of the West. So from the beginning, he had cowgirls, cowboys, he had Mexican vaqueros, he had the Lakota and Pawnee and some of the other Indian groups as well. And as time went by, that diversity only increased.
Fact and fiction often blurred together with Buffalo Bill's Wild West. The show is designed to entertain middle and upper class, mostly white audiences, and much of it bore little resemblance to reality. The dime novel stories of Buffalo Bill grew so exaggerated that Buffalo Bill the Showman became a fictionalized version of William F. Cody the Man. Many of the Wild West figures were romanticized or vilified in the show in a way they never were in life. Cowboys were transformed from their humble and troublesome roots to fanciful heroes on horseback. American Indians were portrayed as marauding antagonists, when in reality they were people with their own distinct lands and cultures, defending their way of life from Euro-American settlement.
Well, petu kile chante was iha chuza pikile. I'd like to greet you in a good way from my heart to you.
American Indian performers were one of the most important parts of the Wild West show and became a centerpiece of the program. Back home, American Indian tribes had faced decades of broken promises from the American government and suffered greatly from the decimation of the buffalo.
Historically, Buffalo Bill's efforts to preserve some of the Indian culture is important because at that point the U.S. government is sending the Indian children off to schools, teaching them not to use their language, their culture, their clothing, teaching them to become good white capitalistic Christians. So he's preserving what a lot of people are trying to exterminate.
It was assimilation that was happening. They were assimilating us into a construct from a freewheeling people and living an inherent right that was given to us, and that was being taken away from us.
It was a time of tremendous racism in this country, a time when American Indians were on reservations, their hair was being cut, they weren't allowed to do their dances, they weren't even allowed to dress like they had traditionally dressed, but not with Buffalo Bill's Wild West.
The Wild West show provided an unexpected escape from the difficulties of reservation life and provided a way to participate in an American economy when they had few options remaining.
In the beginning of his relationship with the Lakota, but also the people, the other nations. So there was some confrontation or some disagreements, but eventually it became a working relationship where they had a relationship between not only the show, but started having relationship with families and helping them get their stories out and helping people to understand about the native people, the indigenous people.
Many of the Lakota who performed for Buffalo Bill enjoyed the work. They came back year after year. They became Ushkate Wichasa, one who performs. They were performers. They were able to recreate their life on the plains, and it gave them very good money. Buffalo Bill paid them as well as anybody else in his show.
While the Wild West show provided income and helped preserve the American Indians' way of life, the consequences were sometimes complicated. Lakota performers were presented as relics of the past, and the show itself did little to educate audiences about the ongoing trauma of government oppression. Touring with the Wild West was a positive experience for some American Indian performers and their families, but it took a heavy toll on others. Even today, some Lakota families are uncomfortable with their ancestors' role as Wild West cast members.
In the Wild West, some white folks would be living in a cabin and Indians would attack the cabin. That would give the audience the stereotype that that's what Indians did. So there were aspects of the Wild West that seemed to say Indian people are a violent people who love nothing more than attacking white people. And really the great American Indian intellectual Vine Deloria Jr., Lakota, wrote a wonderful essay several decades ago saying, don't think this is open and shut.
Vine Deloria Jr. wrote, "Instead of degrading the Indians and classifying them as primitive savages, Cody elevated them to a status of equality with contingents from other nations. In so doing, he recognized and emphasized their ability as horsemen and warriors, and stressed their patriotism in defending their homelands." After Buffalo Bill's death, a condolence letter was written by the Oglala Lakota and sent to Buffalo Bill's wife.
Wapisutawa Wokichigalakapi William F. Cody Lakota Oyateki etaha. The Oglala Sioux Indians of Pine Ridge, South Dakota, resolve that expression of deepest sympathy be extended by their committee in behalf of all the Oglalas to the wife, relatives, and friends of the late William F. Cody, Buffalo Bill. Our hearts are sad from the heavy burden of his passing.
While the American government and Western settlement changed the American Indian way of life, so too did the Lakota change Buffalo Bill.
He really also adapted our culture and our ways because he saw a different way where he became more compassionate. And there was a war bonnet that was given to Buffalo Bill. And that's one of the things that Lakotas have is their generosity. They give the most precious things away because they know it's going to come back one way or another.
One of the things that he always said was, if we have a woman and she can ride and shoot and do the same thing as a man, then by golly, she's going to be paid the same.
One of the things we like to acknowledge in Buffalo Bill is that he treated everybody equally. Equal pay for equal work. Women were equal to men when doing the same job.
Imagine, if you will, the Wild West show coming into a town. All the women come there in their Victorian outfits with the corsets tightly around them and the long, voluminous skirts and all of that. And then they see women in the Wild West show vaulting on and off of horses, wearing split skirts, or even things that are close to trousers, doing everything as well as a man did. That in itself, I think, struck a few blows, if you will, not only for women's suffrage, but for women having more rights and freedoms. He walked that line between the way people thought things were and the way he thought things should be.
The stereotypes of gender just had an interesting rattling when it came to Annie Oakley. And it's not simple. It's not, oh, he showed that women were just as capable of using firearms as men. Well, he showed that. And she still had the tightest waist clothing of anybody on the planet. The notion that you could do anything, could breathe under those terms. So the femininity thing was still very much accented in her performance. But it was quite a tradition-rattling version of femininity.
He brought in people from different cultures to showcase what their culture did best.
There are representatives of cultures from every inhabited continent in the world. So in 1893, he introduces the Congress of Rough Riders of the World, and they bring in Cossacks from Russia and gauchos from Argentina, Arabs from Saudi Arabia. By 1910, Buffalo Bill's Wild West looks like a little mini United Nations. And these all sat and ate together, and as people often would remark, they broke bread in harmony. Part of his goal was to show the diversity of people that make up our world and to encourage world understanding. I mean, there's something pretty special about that. He is a visionary. He's saying there's a whole different way of looking at things.
In the early days of Denver Mountain Parks, there was a road to Lookout Mountain and a funicular, which took visitors to the top of the mountain.
In this particular case, the funicular was like an open car roller coaster in a straight line, clacking up the hill, where people would then get out, enjoy the park, and then get back in and clack back down the hill to Golden. We don't know which way Buffalo Bill traveled. When he came here, he stood here, looked out over the view, looked to the east, and said, "Look at this, the plains where I grew up." Or you can look over to the west and see the beautiful mountains where I spent so much wonderful time hunting with my friends. This would be a great place to be buried. So then in 1917, when he was here in Denver, he recalled that visit, and he asked his wife and his priest at that time, "Bury me on Mount Lookout."
I think a lot of people are surprised to find when they arrive at the Buffalo Bill Museum that it's part of the Denver Mountain Park system and that they're in a park that's part of a very historic mountain park system. The Denver Mountain Parks were established in 1912, which is actually 4 years before the National Park Service was established. So it was a very forward-thinking system that was established by the city and county of Denver at the time.
The city of Denver was amazingly prescient to provide for its citizens in ways that even it didn't really fully understand. Actually, Denver's the only municipality that has a park system outside of its boundaries. And so what I would have people appreciate is the uniqueness of it, and that it was done to create the people's parks.
Buffalo Bill Cody's legacy of advocacy and reconciliation is more powerful today, perhaps, than ever before. He should be remembered not just for being a showman who brought the American West to the world, but as a man who overcame tremendous personal adversity, promoted the rights and freedoms of women, and helped the Lakota and other tribal communities as they were unwillingly ushered into a foreign way of life. The Denver Mountain Parks has been home to Buffalo Bill's final resting place for the last century. But his legacy and the spirit of those who performed with the Wild West show will live on.
If you've ever gone to a Western movie, if you've ever attended a rodeo, if you have ever done a hike through the mountains to enjoy the animals, to look at the wildlife and things like this, these are all the kinds of values that Buffalo Bill was promoting at a time when everybody else was promoting modern and building and construction and industrializing. But now here's Buffalo Bill keeping our West alive.
Museums have kind of a sacred obligation to say, don't oversimplify this person. Whatever you do, don't make him what he never was in life. Don't make him a simple, predictable character. He was not that.
Buffalo Bill was my inspiration and my hero. His generosity and his feeling of togetherness and love just was part of him.
Like Voltaire said, history is a trick we play on the dead. One generation's heroes are often shot out of the saddle by the next generation, and then the next generation coming after that says, oh no, let's rethink Buffalo Bill's life and his significance and maybe put him back in the saddle again.